Welcome to Successfully Ambiguous. I'm Christine Brooks-Cappadocia. Welcome to Successfully Ambiguous. My guest today is Rahim Katchi, whose career has spanned continents, industries, and disciplines. He's worked in everything from luxury fashion to helping founders achieve their vision by incorporating the views and the needs of the end user. So let's open the door and meet Rahim.
It's all about marketing myopia, and that happens not just for businesses but individuals as well. When we tend to fall in love with either who we are or let's say what we have created, and for founders it's quite easy because they are so invested that they feel that this is exactly what people want. But then that might not always be the case. So you have to go to them. You have to talk to them. You have to make sure that you are offering that value. And many founders, and this is pretty consistent across innovation ecosystem, and the different institutions that I work with. When you ask founders, what is your value proposition? And many struggle with that. Many would simply talk about the technology they are building or go on and on, talk about different features and everything else. But then what are the benefits? Because value proposition is much more than that. Technology could be an enabler, but not the entire value proposition. So, and I felt that this is something that has happened, right from early 20th century, the example of Coco Chanel. Though Paul Poire was extremely creative, visionary, but then he felt that what he created is exactly what people wanted. And that was not the case. The world was moving on. And I think this is what I notice a lot, with not just with legacy organizations, but also within startup ecosystem as well. When we have this myopia, we tend to fall in love with what we have created, and we don't think of those final consumers.
One of the things I thought was so interesting about what you've written recently is your call to make public transit stations and public infrastructure more than just functional spaces and incorporate that art and in many ways that community need and vision and what the back into the functional space, right? Not just talking about the technology, but actually the experience of being in these sites. Do you think there's a lesson for modern entrepreneurs, organizations, governments from that?
This comes from my creative background as well. So because have worked in the creative industry, but also when I was a child, and the school bus, that would take us, from my home to my school. That's what I would do. I would be sitting in the corner window seat, and then I will imagine that. If I have to, let's say, redesign this entire, let's say, a road or a city or a pathway, and what I would do. So I would have those imaginations, and I think that's even today I see things, So I'm a very transit enthusiast sort of a person, I waited years, that okay, Eglinton line would open, and I took the very first train on a working Monday, 6:30 at York University School of Continuing Studies. And that's what I noticed. And I said, amazing infrastructure, but why so much of white walls? And it's very functional, but then it could be much more pleasing. It can create that sort of an environment, that is much more welcoming. But then do you think about this is again an opportunity to be more than that, So how about, let's say, the hallway, and I mentioned the Don Valley station, and it is near the Aachen Museum. And I felt like, how many, let's say, people who are Gen Z or younger, they like to go to museums these days. Many do, but then museums are struggling. So how about, let's say, this hallway could be turned into, let's say, an art gallery, and now that is a win-win for both the institutions, right? So I feel that that is something that a lot of our public institutions can do. Instead of working in silos, we can create opportunities, where multiple different organizations are able to meet their objectives while providing value to final consumers, and in this case, people who use that transit.
Well, and I love that because we're often so interested in value engineering to make things as inexpensive to build as possible that we forget about the lost opportunity cost of community building or I do a lot of traveling and there are airports in the world and transit stations that become tourist destinations unto themselves and raise money for the bring value back to the community. I really enjoy the way you look to non-traditional examples for leadership challenges. Most recently, I was reading something about from you, your thoughts on Akhenaten's rule in Egypt more than 3,000 years ago as a leadership lesson. What fascinated you about that story, and what do you think people can learn from it?
I have studied history of arts, when I was doing my undergrad, and I precisely remember that there would be a huge auditorium full of students, and then our professor, she would dim the lights, and then she would project these huge, images from ancient Egypt and Rome, and then Byzantine Empire, and every other place on planet. And then we would study about those artifacts, those paintings, and everything else. And I would just imagine that what it would be like, to be in that part of the world. And then the more you get invested, you also realize that certain things remain the same. So that story is of an Egyptian pharaoh and widely regarded as someone, who introduced monotheist religion to the world. But it did not last for very long. And the reason was because he and everybody he was surrounded by, they were like, yes, that is amazing. That is great. He had a vision, grand vision. But then there was no buy-in from the public. They had their own gods and goddesses and customs. So till the time he was alive, people said, yes, okay, this is what we would do. As soon as he was gone, his entire legacy that he wanted to create just vanished, right? And I think that what happens again, so if you think about all of those stories, that we are talking about today, whether it was Coco Chanel or whether it was this from ancient Egypt, it is still the same thing that you need to get buy-in from all the major key stakeholders, whether it's the public that you are ruling or let's say the customers, who you are selling to. And we keep, in our history, keep on making, this mistake again and again and again, where we tend to fall in love with what we are creating without realizing that people might want something totally different.
We tend to fall in love with the image of the sole visionary without understanding that what makes something relevant and lasting is that involvement, the meeting the need, and the reflecting of the larger community. You've got such great advice. You've worked with founders, students, professionals, and organizations throughout your career. In fact, you're working with Y Space. We had David Kwok on just last week. What if there was one piece of practical advice you'd give our audience, whether they're building a community, navigating their own career journey, or perhaps leading a team? What would it be?
These are different groups, but because I've worked so much with students through York University and other institutions, um, I feel that one advice would be to have more of an active approach. And many of the students that I teach are international students. They have their aspirations, they want to build their careers over here, but it's interesting that how a lot of things get lost uh, during the entire process of when when they are settling down, right? It's an irony that, in Canada, we invite so many newcomers, including students, because we need those human resources, we need those skills. But then in the process of integration, they tend to lose, a lot of that superpower that made them so special. And that's what I see again and again, when I talk to my students. And there is so much of focus on doing things the Canadian way, which is great, and that's how it should be. But then don't forget that you have a lot of superpower, which is basically a different perspective, and everything else that you have done. So one advice would be retain that. That could be your differentiator. You don't have to be like everyone else. That different perspective it can be highly cherished and valued. So I think that would be one of the advice. And another one would be um, don't have that passive approach, where you're just, let's say, for example, applying for job opportunities, which is fine. It is important. You must do that. But then have more of an active role, where you can position yourself in such a way that you are providing the same level of value to the person you are talking to or the organization you want to work with. And there are multiple different ways of doing that. And some of my students do it so amazingly that I really get inspired, the way they come up with those different ways of reaching out to organizations. There is this one story that I tell all my students. I had this student, first year student, uh, international student, got a really good grade. They had to do digital audit of a certain company. He reached out to that organization on LinkedIn. It was a small startup, and they responded. They said, "Okay, come over. Let's see what you have, what sort of an audit you have done." He went there, he presented. They offered him a job.
That's
So
fantastic.
and if you think about it, there was no position open. He created one for himself. So and I feel that that's what my advice would be. Have more of an active approach, and that changes everything. When you're talking to a person and you're not saying that, okay, can you just review my resume or can you refer me for a job position? But instead, it's more about having a good exchange, having a good conversation, sharing your perspective, learning more from their perspectives, and then you build those relationships when you get involved. Um, and I think that creates a lot of value, and you can really, like, create your profile in such a way that you are valued more than just, let's say, for example, yes, I am a student and I'm looking for job opportunities.
And that stands out for people at any stage of their career who are in a job interview. I've hired hundreds of people, and the candidates that stand out are those that are actually looking at that conversation as a way for them to show that they add value, but also to assess whether or not the organization can offer value in a meaningful fit for their skills where they can really shine and thrive. On that note, I want to thank you so much for adding value to our audience by appearing today on Successfully Ambiguous. And thank you for being our final guest on this first season.
Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and thank you so much for sharing this opportunity.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Successfully Ambiguous. Be sure and subscribe to us on YouTube and listen to us on Apple and Spotify. If you've got career questions, be sure to email me at successfullyambiguous@yorku.ca. Don't forget, when opportunity knocks, be ready to answer.